Hello, everybody. Welcome to another very special edition of Conversations with Authors. I'm your host, Paula Farmer. And I say special because we don't just have authors today. We don't just have regular writers. We have poets in our midst. And this is to help us continue to celebrate National Poetry Month and kind of close it out, although I'm hoping today's event will kind of inspire everybody to just keep listening and listening to poetry and reading poetry. And it doesn't have to just be an April thing. It can be a lifestyle. And if anybody's poetry will do that, it's our guest today. And so I'm very excited. We were actually going to have this event originally at the beginning of the month to kind of kick off National Poetry Month. But I'm glad that when we did the reschedule, it ended up at the end of it to kind of close things out and inspire poetry in everybody's lives beyond April. Joining us is National Book Award nominated Lamba Award-winning poet Raquel Salas Rivera with a powerful intensive new collection that looks to the future of Puerto Rico with love, rage, beauty, and hope. Salas Rivera's star began to shine and rise swiftly in the poetry world in recent years, and this is his sixth book. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think at least your sixth book. And it promises to cement his status as one of the most important poets working today. We are so honored to have him. And the featured book called Before Island is Volcano, that's the English version or the English translation, really showcases his talent and varied kind of ways of showcasing poetry and words, and it's just powerful and inspiring. And it also really shows, daringly imagines a decolonized Puerto Rico, and I love the social commentary. In conversation with him and graciously serving as today's moderator is Anthony Cody. Anthony is himself an award-winning poet and writer, finalist for the National Book Award, LA Times, and the California Book Award. He serves as poetry editor for National Press and Omnidawn. Please welcome to our virtual stage our wonderful guest today.
Hello.
Thank you so much. Hola. No, and what's left out of Anthony's biografía is congratulations, on recently winning a Whiting. So cool. That's the reason we had to reschedule. So worth noting.
I know. I'm like, top secret. How do I tell him I can't do this, that we've been planning for like 8 months? What do I do? No.
I know. You just tell me.
Yes.
But I also wanted to say, your work is so, I remember having a conversation with Ura Noel, and Ura being like, have you read Anthony's book? Y qué sé yo, y yo sí. Y él como que, yeah, it's like the most, it's like nothing that I've ever read before being done. And it is, but I thought it was really sweet because it was this very Ura response of just like, I don't know what Anthony's doing or what kind of archives, but so yeah, a lot of admiration here, a lot of respect for your work. It's such a pleasure.
The feeling's mutual, Raquel. I mean, when you reached out and hearing about being able to be here and sit with you, this is like a dream. Truly, you're an icon for so many of us in poetry, and your work rate is unstoppable. And if poetry is not going to save us, Raquel, your work rate will. So
my work rate. I feel a little, it's weird because I had someone the other day say, the poets I know, they spend like all this time on this, crafting this thing for like 10 years. And I was like, but I work really hard on my poems. I edit them a lot. I feel a little shamed, like maybe I shouldn't be writing as much, but nah, one day the well will dry out. So let's hope not anytime soon.
Yeah.
Nada. Let's start by reading. I really would love to hear some poetry from you first.
Yeah, let's do that. I'll read a few poems. I'm going to start. I actually put some poems together from my book, Borderland Apocrypha, based on a poem, a tiny poem in Antes que Isla es volcán, before island is volcano. So I'll read that poem. It's a little poem. Hopefully you weren't planning on reading it today. It's Teoría de la Dependencia. Mientras más nos quitan, más les entregamos. And if I can find my other page. Dependency theory. The more they take, the more we give. So I'm going to read 3 poems from the book, sort of towards the end. This poem is titled The Axolotl Speaks, and it comes with an epigraph about the axolotl's ability to regenerate itself, despite all of the colonizers' attempts to sort of remove them from society. You can cut the spinal cord, crush it, remove a segment, and it will regenerate. You can cut the limbs at any level, the wrist, the elbow, the upper arm, and it will regenerate. Nothing is missing. There's no scarring on the skin at the site of amputation. Every tissue is replaced. They can regenerate the same limb 50, 60, 100 times, and every time perfect. Scientific America, April 2011. Tú me dices, you are losing the animal within. Y yo digo nada. How can you battle a deity? Instead, I ask, how many times have you offered your arms? How many? How do you describe infinite? 70 times 7? The nervous system? Transmutations recalibrated? Spine restacked? Eres guardia or guarded? And you welcome silence with space, with quiet. So I must consider your revival alone, the monstrance opening, and tied my tongue to knees. Enséñame, undeed this border, make me explain Xochimilco canaled, nunca libre, brain clipped, dolor, a synapse lodged between dendrites, una viuda, a retinal, nulo, todo, a truising fissure, a wand, olvidado es el hueso, a chip abandoned. You finally say, do this in memory of me, as if I could tragar un lago, and the cortex could steed, spear, and war the blood. Then you ask me, what has cuando has deshecho scars and reconstruiste the self? Gruñidos, yes, growls, or simply virga gathering in drought. This next poem is actually to another animal, to the nightjar. Its title is Nightjars. Nightjars know this land burns and rebuke nest. Nightjars see tinseled vineyards, raisin paper trays kindle, and observe how fog is just a patient fence for the worker. Nightjars refuse breath, mechanics, firmament, man, God. Nightjars trill murmuration, distraction, cease consumption, offer silence, sight, discovery of flight, the immolation of sky. Nightjars say, before, 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 treaties and trails and migrations, before, 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 lend lease, before, 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 before. This had a name, 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 had a name, had a name. Let me stop right there and regather myself, get some water or coffee. Cura for exhaustion via mirror. I think one of the things I'm always fascinated by and in admiration of you, Raquel, is your ability to keep digging and producing. And I think it's really interesting when someone says it takes 10 years to write something. And I think, you know, you're writing from the histories of years and years of oppression and a right to independence. There's urgency in that. It needs to continue to happen. So I write Cura for exhaustion via mirror in the idea of what we do to sort of shield ourselves, protect ourselves, to keep diving in and facing that work. Cura for exhaustion via mirror. Tell me how many days I am unable to remain stone. I mask how many days I am unable to remain stone. Tell me I am backward and upside down. I mask backward and upside down. Tell me about my own ways. I mask my own ways. Tell me a cathedral is not my desert bones. I mask my desert bones. Tell me my ancestors are not the astral winged. I mask the astral winged. Tell me to kindle agave prayers and swaddled ash. I mask agave prayers and swaddled ash. Tell me a canyon is not a space for me to fortress. I mask a space for me to fortress. Tell me I have no mask. I mask no mask. Tell me you don't know the shape of my grandmother's back. I mask the shape of my grandmother's back. Tell me to remove this mask. I mask this mask. Tell me I do not see you from behind the mask. I mask you from behind the mask. Tell me to forget how my grandfather's memory lives in the spine of a whip. I mask how my grandfather's memory lives in the spine of a whip. Tell me the crevice is no place to garden heartbeats. I mask no place to garden heartbeats. Tell me you do not hear the nearing echo of veins. I mask the nearing echo of veins. I think I'm going to close with one more poem because there's something really interesting and formal happening inside this collection. So I have a sort of funky, loose interpretation of a sonnet, and I'm going to close with that. Instructions on how to build the morning tonight. To set everything on fire, I do not request a valley. To set everything on fire, I bury the monument. Shape my back ampersand and fold, fold. A campesino's sun collapsing a blue Ford Pinto. Shape my back ampersand and fold, fold. How I look toward the sun at setting, ignoring my retina. While the shatter of my ojos is the origin of quiet, my grandmother's left ventricle is weak. While the shatter of my ojos is the origin of quiet, in my neighborhood, the dogs only want to fight. I tell the children of el futuro pasado, exhale, to set everything on fire. Thank you, and it's an honor to be here and open things up, and hopefully you can read a few poems so I'm not the only one having to share a little bit of work.
Gracias por abrir los caminos. That's so beautiful. A lot of feelings. I'm going to share something very quickly on my screen. Oh, I don't know if I can. Paula can help me. I should have warned everybody. That's my bad. I didn't warn anyone I was going to do this. So the story is that my previous collection I often kind of come back to this image of the mucaro, which I also think I include in this collection. And what we have here is that this mucaro, I had an editor say, you know, why don't you just change it in the English to screech owl? And it was so, it offended me so deeply because I said, well, because this is a very specific species of screech owl that exists in Puerto Rico. It's not just any screech owl. This is the mucaro. It exists in Puerto Rico, es de Puerto Rico, right? But of course, so this screech owl was rescued. Some workers that, I'm not sure why they cut the branches of the trees, if it was merited or not, but they cut them, and then someone saw that this little owl had fallen. And when they sent it to the conservatory, sort of like the place where they were rescuing animals, they realized that the little owl had PTSD. So this mucaro had PTSD. And then they like helped the mucaro heal and get better. And I almost died reading. I was like, oh my God. So this is what I hope the spirit of this book is. You know, maybe like the beginning is like this little mucaro starting off just being like, what? And I'm gonna read a little from that beginning, and then hopefully at the end I'm more the wide-eyed, you know, you feel more like a wide-eyed mucaro, just sort of, you know, that look. So I'm gonna stop to share. I'm not gonna need to share anything else. Thank you for having this moment with Milagritos. La aproximación. El trato pertenece al agua. Designa la totalidad de relaciones que tienes con otro. Se podría decir que la vida que se trama entre dos es trato. Tratar el agua es curarla para el consumo, pero tu trato habla volúmenes de tus ganas de presenciarnos. Al tratarte como agua, te asumiría como esencial y cotidiana. A eso aspiro cuando me enamoro, a que seas mi agua. Como somos los dos de aquí, estamos un poco contaminados y el trato debe tomarlo en cuenta. Te trato como una isla que mira a otra isla y entiende que el agua es poder. Sé que mezclo las cosas, pero el trato es la mezcla de todas las cosas que nos hicimos cuando nos quitaron la tierra, talaron nuestros bosques y repartieron los frutos. No es metáfora cuando digo fruto. A veces es metáfora cuando hablo del agua y de nosotros. Es fácil confundirse con tanto lenguaje de percebe pegado a nuestro muro. Confundirse es una manera de acercarse. Me aproximo, fallo y me enamoro. El trato es la suma de las relaciones que tuve con cada persona que conocí en esta isla, a quienes amé en menor y mayor grado. Si me hirieron o me quitaron la camisa, igual son parte del trato que firmamos. To approach. Treatment belongs to water. It designates the sum of all relations one has with another. You might say the life schemed between two is treatment. To treat water is to cure for consumption, but your treatment speaks volumes about your desire to bear witness. To treat you like water, I'd have to assume you as essential and daily. I aspire to this when I fall in love, that you be my water. Since we are both from here, we are a bit contaminated, which treatment must consider. I treat you like an island looks at another and understands water is power. I know I'm mixing things, but treatment is the mixture of all things, all the things we did to each other when they took our land, cut down our forests, and distributed our crops. It isn't a metaphor when I say crop. Sometimes it's a metaphor when I talk about us and water. It's easy to get confused with so much barnacle language stuck to our wall. Confusion is a way of getting close. I come close, fail, and fall in love. Treatment is the sum of all relations had with each person I knew on this island. Each I loved to a greater or lesser degree. If they hurt me or took my shirt, they are still part of the treaty we signed. And recently, I've been working now for a year on building a digital archive of Puerto Rican poetry. So a lot of what I do is go in and take books that are public domain and make them available as part of el proyecto de la literatura puertorriqueña, the Puerto Rican Literature Project. Y ayer digitalicé un poema de José P.H. Hernández sobre una casa abandonada. Y me puse a pensar como qué raro, ¿no? Este poema que cruza los siglos, ¿no? Yesterday I digitized a poem, I scanned a poem by Jose P.H. Hernández about an abandoned house. And I thought how strange that in some ways you could be writing the same poem to very different moments in time. Desconstrucción de un hogar. Cuando la brisa tumba el sol y a lo mejor pierdo los números importantes o el celular se me agota en una siesta eterna, juego un juego tan peligroso como creer en la permanencia del tinte o comprarme un mueble para el apartamento. Juego a que soy las ruinas de una casa abandonada, en un terreno sin título registrado, una casita de 3 cuartos, un baño, una sala y las rejas más hermosas. Se me cae el pelo en cantos, nadie me baña, las paredes se ponen encrenques, quedo hecho costillas manchadas por el sudor y el hollín, se me pelan las rodillas sin amor, los perros me mean el candado enmohecido, me siento a veces casa, a veces persona que juega a tener casa. Los años pasan. De noche, los múcaros anotan mi caída en cámara lenta, los ratones traen migajas, me ocupan 100 pies y polillas. Desarrollo nuevos hábitos, lo llamo estilo de vida. La soledad me acompaña por las fases del día, un segundo sol que ruega hacia el cielo. Sé que el mundo sigue sin fin, pero veo cómo se mudan los vecinos, sus casas sin vender, prontas a acompañarme en nuestras soledades. Mis dueños por allá me imaginan igualita. Comienzan a darme pena con su idea de quién fui, su esperanza de recuperarme pronto, pero soy unas ruinas con aspiración a casa, pero soy unas ruinas. Of course, my context is very different from Jose P.H. Hernández. This sort of relates to all the people who have moved away from Puerto Rico, right, have left their houses either for sale or not for sale because they simply can't imagine. A lot of them after Promesa, a lot of them after Maria, a lot of them after the earthquakes, at sort of in this context of like new settler colonialism, these empty houses, these beautiful ruins. You know? The construction of the home. When the breeze knocks down the sun and I maybe lose the important numbers or my phone knocks out in an eternal lap nap, I play a game as dangerous as believing in the permanence of die or buying furniture for an apartment. I pretend I am the ruins of an abandoned house that sits on unregistered land, a house with 3 rooms, a bathroom, a living room, and the most beautiful railings. My hair falls in chunks, no one bathes me, the walls grow gaunt, I'm all rib stained by sweat and soot, my knees peel loveless, the dogs piss on my rusty chain. I sometimes feel like a house, others like a person who plays at having a house. The years pass. At night, the mucaros note my slow motion decline. The mice bring crumbs. I'm occupied by centipedes and clothes moths. I develop new habits. I call it a lifestyle. Solitude accompanies me through the day's phases, a second sun that begs towards the sky. I know the world hasn't ended, but I see how the neighbors move, their homes unsold, soon to accompany me in our solitudes. From afar, my owners imagine me unchanged. I start to pity their idea of who I was, their hope of recovering me soon. But I am some ruins that aspire to become house, but I am some ruins. Y ahora, nada, voy a leer un poco de la sección que Anthony leyó un poema. Now I'm gonna read a little from the section that Anthony read a poem from. Y creo que ahí terminó. I think maybe we stop there and we can just kind of chat. Tempestad. Viento concentrado. Un odio que parece la despedida entre países. Tempest. A concentrated wind. A hate that looks like a goodbye between countries. Extinción. Los cruceros llevan extintores porque aún rodeados de agua nos puede consumir el fuego. Extinction. Cruise ships carry extinguishers because even when surrounded by water, we can still be consumed by fire. Historia. Nacer de la impaciencia de un río que no se congela. La inseguridad de un habla que nunca se graba. History. Born from the impatience of a river that doesn't freeze, the insecurity of a language that leaves no record. Representación. Sellada mi boca de la tuya vestida. Representation. My sealed mouth dressed as yours. Teoría del abandono. Mientras más grande es la brecha, más rápido nos lanzamos al barranco. Abandonment theory. The wider the gap, the faster we speed toward the cliff. Calibán a sus amigos. No tengan miedo, no son ruidos, son canciones. Caliban to his friends. Don't be afraid, those aren't noises, they are songs. Calibán a Shakespeare. De sícorax, coquíes, cubanos y luciérnagas, que amaste sapos, escarabajos y luces. Caliban to Shakespeare. By sycorax, coquís, cucubanos, and fireflies, which you called frogs, beetles, and lights. Calibán a Ariel. Me encadenaste para liberarte de un amo común. Y todavía piensas que yo soy el caníbal. Calibán to Ariel. You chained me to free yourself from our common master, and you still believe I'm the cannibal. Calibán a la tempestad. Dependes del viento, dependes del humor azaroso del mar. Tiránico, mandas desde tu dependencia. Caliban to the tempest. You depend on the wind, you depend on the sea's arbitrary mood, ruling tyrannically from your dependence. Calibán a Próspero. Me raptaste de mi hogar, castigándome por no llamarte mister. Aprendí tus malas palabras y te maldije en tu idioma. Pero para que entendieras, nunca entendiste. Decías que mi acento era muy fuerte. You stole me from my home, punished me for not calling you mister. I learned your bad words, cursed you in your language so you would understand. You never understood. You told me my accent was too thick. Gracias. Y ahora, nada, I think maybe we just talk a little bit.
Yeah, because I have questions. I have like a whole list. I have a CVS receipt. I have of questions. No,
Oh my God.
I do. I think you kind of you started touching on a question I had about language and like how you navigate between Spanish and English in your story about the Múcaro. Because for me, my engagement, I entered poetry and understanding poetry through hearing poetry in Spanish. It was the first time in my life where I even felt like I could feel like a sonic quality to whatever the iambic pentameter that was supposed to be there in English. I didn't understand it. I didn't feel it, but it felt alive when I encountered it with Neruda, actually. So this is not a question. This is just praise. You are Neruda, is what I'm saying. No, but I do feel that, because when I've encountered your work in that engagement between the languages, there is something there in texture and richness and meaning for me. The difference between Mukaro and Shrieking Owl, the difference between pronto, pronto, and soon, soon, the difference between miedo and afraid, odio and hate, viento and wind, right? There's something, I feel like there's something being embodied there. So I guess I'd like you to maybe talk about the weight of words and meaning between the languages, and navigating that for you and making those choices and translating your own work, and how
So hard. It's because
I know.
es como, ¿verdad? Because I mean, I guess it's not hard for people who aren't poets or you know, that attentive. I guess any writer that's that attentive to it sounding good, because that does matter for us, like a great deal, right? And it's a situation where I've had kind of so many situations with translators that are a little less interested in I'm always like, why do you translate literature if you're not interested in literature beyond like a discourse, right? Once I had like a professor say that, you know, he read a poem the way he would read a newspaper article as discourse. And I was like, that's so horrible. I can't engage with that, right? It was like my nightmare, I think. But yeah, I think going to that, you know, what you're asking is it kind of, I feel like also like a poet question. We're so attentive to language, and also that not just beauty, but something, right? That words have, that sort of spell, that casting of the spell, you know, maybe to borrow the way Iriselma Robles uses it. It has a book called Libro de los Conjuros, which I'm translating. So words are kind of like spells, you know. And I think that there's something that poets pay attention to, that are poets who are translators, that has to do with it sounding good, right? Because the you know, the way I think of it is, you know, if a poet spent this much time trying to find the exact words, then the translator should similarly pay that kind of attention to how it sounds, right? And how that sound relates to everything else. And there was something I really liked that you said early on. You were talking about, well, not just what you said about Neruda, but you were also sort of talking about like formal, like what's doing formally. And I think something I've realized talking about this book, right? This was originally commissioned by Cine Jimenez Vera as a children's book. And it had a lot more rhymed poetry when I started. And I think I associate rhyme with my childhood. And there's something that I've always found very fascinating about rhyme, even though it's not my preferred medium. It's not my preferred sort of, you know, like it feels a little too constrained for me most of the time. But on occasion, I'm like, okay, I want to do this. And I think there's something tricky about rhyme. There's almost something like deceptive about rhyme, in that it sounds so simple, right? Especially as a child, right? You're reading it, you're like, there's a musicality, it has a naturalness to it, but it's so constructed, right? It's so calculated and constructed and thought through by the poets. And I think that if we were from a different like era of poetry, right? You know, it would be more second nature, because we'd almost be forced to write in rhyme. There'd be no free verse, right? But I personally associate it with my childhood. I associate it with my mother reading me Martí, you know, or my mother reading me Neruda, no tanto Neruda, pero Miguel Hernández, right? Or like even Lorca, you know, with that sort of rhyme that's almost like enchanting, almost like a lullaby, almost, right? It has that quality. But it is very deceptive, right? Because it has a seeming simplicity. And it's very difficult. It's a very difficult thing to do as a poet, right? So I guess I have a question in there for you. Like, how do you relate to rhyme?
I think for me, when I think about rhyme in the sense of play, and I think about like those like exactly that what you're talking about in terms of like early childhood, right? You're rhyming and there's like a sense of wonder in like finding like two words or even like a homonym, right? Or something that like, and so thinking that through, I think that's where whenever I encounter that I've accidentally included rhyme in something, it's like a moment of like an unrestrained joy that I've maybe like been forced to forget in like adulthood, or like through the discourse of what a poet should be, right? Suddenly you see an internal rhyme and it's like, oh no, what did I do? And
I have to purge it.
Yes. But then when it comes into the ear and you've uttered it, there's like a sense of excitement. And so I think about that excitement when I find a rhyme, or even when I like repeat lines, and when like this line sounds good to my ear, it's like there's like a bit of play here. I can kind of play with that and kind of put it and like play with it in my mouth and skip down the street, you know? So I think about that. I think about language and the ability to kind of have those moments of like where the work is heavy. Obviously the work is heavy, right? So there's going to be like those little tiny stars in the sky of joy for you as the writer to like keep going. And that's how I think about it, because I remember looking at like an Italian version of Dante where everything rhymed, and I thought, my God, what's happening? This is wild. Look how thick these books are. And then thinking, and then like having that reverse option of then like coming back to seeing like a translation of it, and it doesn't. And it's like, oh, this is, rhyme is dead, long live free verse. So like, I think there's something there in that, like, I always remember that like joy of like seeing the original, like, oh, this is wonderful. He's done this so long. And I think that's interesting that I think my answer actually is leading to another question I had wanted to ask you specifically, and like to offset the amount of work that you do produce. What is your source of joy? What is that source of joy for you to return to the page? I only have heavy things.
You want honesty?
Yeah. Let's do it.
Movies and weed make me so happy. My partner, movies and weed. I'm a very simple person. I do like people and I like socializing, and I like spending time with friends, but I'm a huge like cinephile, like all kinds of just a wide range, from like very bad horror flicks to like, just like Andrea Arnold is my favorite director, and yet like I really like just like any kind of act. I saw Con Air the other day. I was like, what? Why am I watching Con Air? And it was interesting because we were discussing. We're like, how did they get all these people onto this incoherent film? It was like fascinating. It had like John Malkovich and like as the villain. I was like, who decided to do an action film where John Malkovich is the villain and Nick Cage with his like wig mullet, and like it's just so amazingly, spectacularly absurd film. And I really was just as fascinated by it as I was by Andrea Arnold. And I think that there's something very freeing for me. And I envy it. I wish I could have been a filmmaker. It's not, I would have been as obsessed with it as I am with poetry. And I don't think for me it's possible to do two things like that with that intensity at the same time. But when my day ends, I like watching movies and like smoking weed. That's
yeah. No, I think that's great. I think it's great. I think it's good to have. There is, because there is, while you're still like you're stepping away from the page, from the poem, you're still looking at it in terms of like that moment of like, this book is its own film, right? It's its own like connected
that.
and closed universe that you've made, right, as your own auteur of sorts, right? So no, that's great. That's
I like
great.
that.
That's
Yeah,
great.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
Cinema changed, I think, how people write. It's not talked about as much as it should be. But cinema kind of, I think, forced poets to level up in some ways. But that's my theory. Yeah.
Let's park that, because I like that, because I'm getting questions in the chat room, folks watching. Someone has a question about Leslie Akoka asks, could you both comment on the use of repetition in both Spanish and English in poetry? I can start, because I have a very simple answer. When I think about repetition, I think about the idea of song and the idea of like engaging with the audience. I think about like someone like Juan Felipe Herrera, or well, specifically Juan Felipe Herrera. I think working with him and hearing him like wanting to engage the audience and like break that wall that's supposed to happen, and like, we're all poetry, guys, let's just all, let's do this. And I've been trying to incorporate that more, like the idea of moments that I can have repetition in a poem, so I can invite the audience in with me. And it's been interesting when I've done it with folks, because I think it's the same idea of that play, of that childhood memory, that it gets scary. It gets like, we're having to repeat too. I came here to watch and stare at the poet, not participate. So that's where I think about song and engagement and trying to like invite the others in when I think about Spanish and English, and the idea of repetition.
Yeah, I mean, I think when hearing you describe it, I think of Urayo and Noel, and how Ura, in fact, engages so much, right? Like his performances are so much about engagement. And I don't know if it's like me being on the spectrum, but I always hated audience participation. I was always like, what are we doing? I didn't become a poet for this.
I feel the same way. I'm like, why am I making
like,
us
wait,
do this?
why am I being, what is this summer camp shit? I don't like it. but that being said, right, I think it was Antonio Machado that said that the greatest compliment he ever received was walking through, maybe it was the streets of Madrid, and hearing someone playing one of his poems that the person had musicalized, like on a guitar. And I think that there are different forms of repetition, right? That homage is also a kind of repetition. And I think that ultimately poets do want to repeat in time, echo in time, right? Repeat with a difference. But in terms of within structurally, I think that, meter in English is so much harder in some ways, because it's, you have to do all this trochee and spondy stuff that you have to do in Spanish. So there is something that simplifies that. But I try to be conscious of when I used to use a lot more alliteration and assonance, and that sort of like poetic parallelism. But I think I've kind of like brought it down a little bit and simplified it a little bit, and become less use of refrain and less use of that kind of recurrence, which was there in earlier work for me. But I don't know why, honestly. I think I just sort of wanted to move away from what I was used to and what I had been doing for a long time, not as a principled thing.
Yeah,
just like a couple more questions.
Yeah, there's a few. Let's go with a little more simpler question before we dive back in. Comment on favorite Puerto Rican poets. I'm saying past or present. Let's go with it. Yeah.
Wow.
You're in the archive, right? You're there.
Yeah. It's a dangerous question.
I know.
En verdad, mira, un montón de gente. Right now, Xavier Valcárcel has a recent book which I absolutely love, called Elio. And his previous book, El Deber del Pan, is incredible. I'll type it into the chat, right? I have always been a fan of Ángela María Dávila's Animal Fiero y Tierno. It's one of the best books ever, poetry books ever written. I'm also a huge fan of like older poets in the archive that I'm dealing with. Chevremont, I think, is sort of wild for his generation. And there's also this poet who I found wrote this book, Poemas Raros, which is Ramos Muñoz. And it's all these like hyper materialistic poems that are like, in which he says that he's the same as his dog, and that, you know, he's sort of like praising like death and materiality and atoms, and he starts talking about atoms, and he dedicates the book to his father and the 20th century. It's like this wild work of something which I'm obsessed with currently. I'm obviously highly influenced by ¿verdad? De mi generación, así, like Gadiel Francisco Ruiz Rivera, Iriselma Robles, Nicole Cecilia Delgado, personas más anteriores, Vanessa Dross. I mean, it's just a long list. It's very hard. It's just very hard. Francisco Ferri. It's just a very difficult list to make because it's my everyday. My everyday is that list. But Pedro Pietri en la diáspora, obviamente. Martín Espada, ¿verdad? And also folks like Edwin Torres, like Ura, Willy Perdomo, you know, maestro, tú sabes. No sé, it's really hard, you know, to make that list, and, you know, people like Denny Navrashi, which opened the way for some of my own poetics, right? There's a lot of people. It's you know, Aracelis Girmay, you know, like it's just a very, and it's an endless list of poets. So I don't know if I could say favorites.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. I'm thinking like, yeah, it's once you open the box, it just keeps going, right? Especially, you know, this is your everyday, right? You're looking through the archive. Is there a place, right? And maybe we can just briefly mention like a place where folks could go to online is there like a landing spot for?
I mean, there is, but it's got nothing because we're gonna launch it officially in year 2, but it will, once we launch it, have the first 500 poets with, I've already digitized about 4,000 poems. And many of them will have translations, and it will be open access, and everyone will be able to read it and use it. It's the best thing I've done in my life. So I'm very excited about people reacting to it and engaging with it.
And the next thing that I'm just going to take some questions for the audience so they can be kind of more part of this conversation, because we can just keep talking and then they'll be like, why are we here? How do you feel like the pandemic has impacted your process? I know there's a lot in that question, just in like your writing.
It slowed it down. Like slowed me down. I don't know if you feel the same. How do you feel about that?
I'm crawling. Everything was like go, make, build, you know, roll out a carpet, lay around, roll in the dirt, dust yourself off and jump back up and keep making it again. So like for me, it just changed. I mean, I went from like having like a tangible space that I could work in and spread out to like being at this desk. I didn't even have a desk when the pandemic started. That's like had to shift, right? I had to like have a place where I could like do something, anything. And everything has just slowed. And I've appreciated that, because I think we get taught like capitalism wins. You have to make until you're done, and then you have a sip of water, and then you go back in and you make.
Yeah, I think, and in that slowing down, I think I had to deal with a lot of grief that had accumulated and things that I hadn't dealt with, you know, like el duelo, you know, just to be able to grieve. A lot of historical trauma with Puerto Rico, a lot of like personal things, you know, and suddenly you have the time. and you're there, and it's like looking you in the face, and I think that changed me and my relationship to writing. I don't know if that is, I don't know in what ways that is legible in writing itself, because I don't think it always works that way, but I'm sure it's there.
Yeah, I agree. I think pandemic has made me just like realize that I'm like a weepy sponge, like it's like we're absorbing all this like harm and trauma and history. And then suddenly it's like I'm watching a show about a kid, walking on an errand through like the middle of rural Japan. And I feel like I'm just gonna start crying. And I'm like, why? And it's because of
Yeah.
all of that, right?
I'm such a pandemic crier. 100%. Yes. Yes. Lloro por nada. I'm just like, oh my God, did you see the balloon?
Exactly. uh, Angel Dominguez, you may have heard of them before, wants to know what's our secret to writing such tremendous fire.
I love that. His question is like a compliment question. It's like a compound compliment and question. Such a Scorpio.
I know. I'll answer. I think I'll answer first. I think mine has, and it's kind of part and parcel with the discussion about the pandemic, because I think leading up to the pandemic, I don't think I had moments to like release and enjoy or slow down. It's just like nonstop, like I think for me, like capitalism and age started like speaking in the back of my head, and I'm like, well, gotta buck up and go hard. And so like I think it was like a spiral of like disaster in a way too, of just like going and going and going, and also feeling like I've aged like 80 years too, when you're just like making poems and there is no release, there's no movie, there's no weed, there's no anything, it's just going back in again and again. So yeah, it is. And it's like, oh, my sense of joy is like I'm gonna like play with some poems and InDesign and then go back and make it again and start again. So that pandemic part has like allowed me a little chance to like be gentle with myself in a way I don't think I've ever thought about.
I love that. I keep thinking about Angel's question and how it contains the word secret, and how there's Scorpio. I just can't like let go. It's the secret. Honestly, Angel, it's reading poets like you. Come on, Anthony. That's my secret. I think poetry is as much a solitary exercise as it is communal.
That's a good point. You're right. Yeah, being able to have like a community of other people to like read their work. If you can't, like, I can't talk to you right now, but I can open up your book. I can go online and look at a poem, see your shit post on Twitter or whatever, and then go from there.
Exactly, and be like, yeah. Well, to be honest, the first poet I read whose work I fell in love with, this made me feel less lonely. I think that's why I fell in love with his work, which was Langston Hughes. I felt so isolated where I was. I was in Houston. It was a really bad situation. I was in middle school and being bullied every day. And then here's this person that has a very different life trajectory and intersectionalities, but I'm crying reading his poems, right? And I think I maybe that's why it's always associated with like think more explicitly political or social questions for me too, is because it was never not, right? It was never not that for me. It was something that made me engage with the world. I actually think it's hyper political in that it's so much of the body and the experience is a lived thing. I don't know how to transmit that, but poetry tries, right? And I don't see how that's not about our relation to others. I don't see how that's not about like that moment. Fred Moulton would call it touch, right? The moment of touch, And
I have a question because I did this came up somewhere where I was like trying to like prepare notes and come off as like inside the actor studio and not be just a dummy from Fresno. But you mentioned it when I had a question about that. This was originally like the seedling of a children's book, and then it became a poetry collection. Where can you talk about that process and what that journey was like, and when did that strike you?
Well, honestly, a little bit of what you described with the joy, right? That joy in like rhyme happened to me at the beginning. Well, initially I was when Sydney asked me, I was like, I don't know, Sydney, I write some really depressing stuff. Should the children be reading this? Keep the children safe. That was my policy.
Ban my books. Don't let them.
Yeah, I was like, no, don't give it to the children. They'll all become queer. But la verdad que I really just was a little concerned that it would be too uncomfortable for me, and I do get a little bit like my arts, but then I was like, oh, come on, some of your favorite writers and some of your favorite work has this quality that you've always wanted to have, right? That you've always found mesmerizing, but that you just chosen not to engage with. Don't chicken out, like do some rhyme poetry, and I started, it was so rhymed, and I had so much fun, and it was so like, and I was getting the syllable counts wrong because I was counting, and then I was going back and I was fixing it and trying to figure out how to make it work, and it was very fun. It was very enjoyable. And then the press shut down, but I kept writing the book, and it changed in character. And then it sort of became about writing for the future, right? And I think part of it, the more I think about it, the more it's sort of wild, because I think it has a little bit to do with the fact that I don't want to have children. My reasons for not wanting to have children have always been that I feel it's a huge responsibility that socially isn't taken up in that Angela Davis way it should be, right? Like communal raising, it ends up falling so much on people, and I just didn't see myself as wanting that responsibility, but also like I think it brought up a lot of questions about like continuance and future, and I don't think I was ready to like look at those questions, and so I realized that even so, it didn't mean that I didn't, even if my choice was not to have kids, it didn't mean that I didn't want to engage with the possibility of there being a different world. And so it changed, the poetry changed. So that was my process.
I love that because that, seeing the future and then thinking through what a future could be like, and thinking that, processing it mentally of the idea of like writing a children's book, I like immediately was like, oh, well, yes, this makes total sense. So it's good to hear that. We're right in at an hour.
Yeah, I think we do that. I mean, I'm a 2% battery, so it might be a good moment.
Okay. Well, with that, let's thank you so much, Raquel, for spending time for writing your book. Everyone.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure, de verdad, y escucharte leer, de verdad, siempre magia.
And then let's give it back to Paula.
I got to say, I mean, what a treat that you not only gave us this very authentically kind of interesting and insightful conversation, and you can tell that you two love and respect each other. It really comes across, but to treat us with several poems. Wow, I wasn't expecting that. So thank you. We really appreciate it as the audience watching, but for Book Passage, that really means a lot. And continued success on the tour, Raquel and Anthony. You're a great moderator. We're going to reel you in every time. You're not a dummy from Fresno. Don't even try that.
I was like, what is that? Thank you so much for having
That's
us.
not even a thing.
Yeah, I was like,
It's my thing. It's my thing.
It's your thing. Well, we appreciate both of you. And I hope, as I mentioned at the beginning, that conversations like this, which are going to live forever on YouTube, will inspire people to access poetry throughout the year. But yeah, what a great way to kind of shine the light on it in April for National Poetry Month and have great poets like we did today. Thank you, audience, for coming in, taking time out from your busy middle of the day or middle of the evening. Please feel free to kind of encourage people to come back in the archives and watch this. It was very important and rare. We don't have a lot of poets, so this is rare and wonderful. Also, if you're joining us and you've joined us for several of these and you'd like to see more events like this, don't forget to kind of hit that like and subscribe. It really is, it takes you a few seconds, but it really helps Book Passage a lot. And also support our authors and our bookstore by buying today's featured book, collection of poems, Before Island is Volcano. We have them at both our locations, Corte Madera, San Francisco, and you can order online or come in safely or give us a call. We'd be happy to fulfill your orders. Thank you so much for joining.